This is a video featured on William Lane Craig, his or someone's effort to collect together Dr. Craig videos. I don't think it's Craig himself, but it's someone who is sympathetic to him.
You know, nobody asked me if I wanted to exist. Yeah, one day, boom, there you are. And you think to yourself, why am I here? Well,
that's a pretty silly question because it presupposes that there is a reason. I would start in a position of no assumptions whatsoever.
what do you think? Is there a reason we're here? Do our lives have any real significance?
Well, that depends.
On what?
On whether you believe in Christianity or not, apparently.
On whether or not God exists.
Well, and specifically, generally God, specifically Christianity.
Wait, hold on. Are you saying that my life has no significance because I don't believe in God?
No, not at all. I'm saying that if God doesn't exist, it doesn't matter what you believe. Our lives.
This is the general overriding criticism here is that they're guilty of black and white thinking. That is, if God doesn't exist, then suddenly all significance goes out of the universe. That's the weakest point in their argument. That for some reason, just because there's not an ultimate significance, that it's not some part of an ultimate plan for the entire universe and it's an eternal plan, that then suddenly it becomes unimportant in its entirety. So really black and white thinking there.
Would have no objective meaning, value, or purpose. Many atheists themselves recognize this.
And moved beyond it with other non-theistic ethical systems, and that's something that they always neglect to say.
If atheism is true, life is absurd.
Okay, and why do they think that?
To begin with, if God does not exist, then the physical universe is all there is. Which means you and I are just accidental byproducts of nature.
So what?
Right, so?
That means we were not intentionally designed. So there's no purpose for us being here.
Okay, but that doesn't mean there has to be no purpose. That just means we find our own purpose.
Whoa.
It gets worse. If God does not exist, there is no absolute standard of moral value.
Yeah, I agree. There's no absolute standard of moral value, but that doesn't mean that there are not moral values.
Heard of Richard Dawkins, the atheist? He points out that in a materialistic universe, there is at bottom no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but pointless indifference.
Yes, there are lots of non-believers who will say that. Certainly all the existentialists, that's their starting point, and then they move on to construct meaningful existences or moral systems like consequentialism or contractarianism.
So you're saying atheists can't be good people?
No, I'm not saying that. Many atheists live good lives. What I'm saying is, atheism fails to provide an objective basis for saying any particular action is good or evil.
And so a lot of people do have an intuitive feeling that if something's wrong, it should be wrong in a kind of absolute sense. And I'd just say that's a human fallacy of thought, that we think that. But if you think harder on it, and that's where existentialism comes in, that there isn't an objective basis for saying this is right and that's wrong.
Oh, come on. After millions of years of sociobiological evolution, humans have developed a sense of morality. We all know it's good to feed a hungry child and bad to torture someone for fun.
Well, we have that intuition, and that may have a sociobiological root, but there's more to it than that.
Of course we do, but that's precisely what atheism cannot explain.
No, we can explain. It's an atheistic theory that it has a social and biological root. We can explain its existence. What they want is to explain, what William Lane Craig would want is to explain why it's objectively true. And I'm personally, I'm rejecting the idea of objective morality. I'm saying that's an incoherent position in the first place. I'm going to, in sort of an analog with compatibilism with regard to free will, I resurrect objective morality to mean morality that's more objective, that is, more certainly based on reality. Instead of being objectively true moral positions, I'm saying it's a moral position that's based on reality. So when I say objective morality, that's what I mean.
If there's no God, then what we consider right or wrong is nothing more than an accident of evolution or a human social convention.
So what?
Well, then we'd have to be able to explain why there's so much convergence. Why is murdering someone a taboo all through different human cultures, all through time? So it's to say that it's an accident suggests that it's somehow just arbitrary, and it's not. It's in touch with real conditions of our existence, and hence it's persistent across cultures and time. Just to say that an accident is again very dismissive. I think that's another problem at several levels of their argument, is that they're just very dismissive of the alternative.
But I'm good with that.
Really? Evolution implies survival of the fittest, not morality. And social convention means
Yeah, and the fittest may be the altruistic one. So, there isn't a problem there. It's not like it's necessarily at odds with morality. It's just not necessarily conducive to morality.
that racism, intolerance, and cruelty are not really wrong. They just happen to be unpopular.
No, you can make there are lots of moral systems that are atheistic where you can make arguments against the rightness of slavery or racism. That's not a problem.
Okay, so atheists need to come up with some objective standard for rights and wrongs.
No, they don't. They just have to be justified in their standard. You have to be able to justify it. If you've given up on objective in the sense of an absolute truth, then we move on to a standard, myself personally, as of objective, meaning in touch with reality. And so in order to be able to say, that's good, that's bad, we have to be able to justify it. How do we justify it? We justify it with facts of reality. That is, we move towards objective reality. We don't really achieve it any more than we do with objective truth. Since modern philosophy, we've had to accept the idea that the absolute objective knowledge is something that's beyond attainment for humans. So we just accept, okay, there's uncertainty, but certainly there is a gradient of things that I can be really, really certain of, like the chair I'm sitting on, and things that are much more speculative, like, multiverses, or the B theory of time.
How about this? If an action leads to human flourishing, then we can say it's objectively good. And if it doesn't, it's objectively evil.
But why think that human flourishing is good? Aren't you being species-centric? Why not refer instead to the flourishing of rats or cabbages?
Well,
And who gets to decide what contributes to human flourishing?
These are all just little problems that you could work out. She's going to add a few more here. But if you do accept the idea that we come into this world as morally sensitive agents, and we're going to do morality. There's no option of getting out. Even if you kill yourself, that's potentially a morally significant act. So there's really no way of getting away from morality. We just have to decide whether we're going to do it well or do it badly. And if we're going to do it well, we're going to use reason and facts. And we're going to have a dialogue, and we're going to try to be fair. All of these terrible examples here of moral failings, I think if you kept those things in mind, they would be sorted out. And I think if you were open to the idea that we're going to try to be fair-minded, I don't think you'd be able to exclude the ideas that if we're going to be moral, we should base it on facts, use reason, try to be fair-minded. I think there'd be no way of getting around that, and I think there'd be no feasibility for having something like Nazi Germany.
Hitler was convinced killing millions of Jews would promote human flourishing. And Margaret Sanger thought forcing poor people to be sterilized would lead to human flourishing. As Kai Nielsen points out, pure
This is the thing that Kai Nielsen gets quoted for more than anything else, and it's all Christian apologetics sites that do it for him. Kai Nielsen does go on. He's a compatibilist or more utilitarianism, so he concedes, like many do, that, yeah, objective morality is something that's beyond us, where it's unattainable, so let's construct a moral system with that in mind. But they'll only tell you that he rejects objective.
practical reason will not take you to morality. So if atheism is true, there is no legitimate basis for saying that behaving one way is worse than behaving any other way. So
Okay, so we've rejected objective criteria, but there still are important criteria. This is another case of where black and white thinking is coming in. Just because it's not an ultimate super objective reason doesn't mean it's not a good reason. And we can evaluate that reason or those reasons, there certainly can be more than one reason, objectively and decide whether it's good or bad, right or wrong. I wanted to talk about the previous point, that the claim that was made.
legitimate basis for saying that behaving one way is what morality. So if atheism is true, there is no legitimate basis for saying that behaving one way is worse than behaving any other way. So it really doesn't matter how you live your life. Your day-to-day choices are meaningless.
That's depressing.
Meaningless. They're not meaningless to us, obviously. They're not meaningless to the people around us, obviously. And, the people who are on the periphery who would be affected by it. And they're not meaningless to us in the future if we recall that or other people recall that action. It's just silliness. Just because, again, this is black and white thinking, because it's not impacting on an ultimate universe level scale, then it's not significant. It's just silly black and white thinking.
So if there's no God, what happens when you die?
Well, nothing. You simply cease to exist.
Right. So one person lives a kind, generous, thoughtful life. Another lives a horrible, violent, selfish life. It doesn't matter. In both cases, the outcome is the same. Nothingness.
Isn't that insane? I mean, William Lane Craig needs this. He needs this in order to be able to explain away why God can do things like command the Israelites to go into Canaan and butcher man, women, and child and kill them all. He has to take this position that ultimately, morally, it's completely insignificant. So really, why he takes this position on moral realism or objective morality is connected to why the defense that he's going to have to use in order to defend a literal reading of the Bible, where God does command the Israelites to go into Canaan and butcher man, woman, and child. Obviously, many of those children perfectly innocent and would have to have gone through terrible suffering and fear. But that doesn't matter. So a perfectly good God can butcher children, and it can be perfectly fine. The really scary thing is that someone like William Lane Craig, or someone who accepts his moral system, also has to accept that things as atrocious as genocide can be morally good.
So how can their life choices have any objective meaning?
Well, it's certainly meaningful if I discover a cure for cancer or save a child's life.
I agree completely. But atheism can't explain why.
You can, and there are lots of systems that address that. Certainly, consequentialism, under utilitarianism. That's our criterion for judging the moral quality of something. Well, what were the consequences? And if it has good consequences, it helps prevent suffering or increase the amount of happiness, then we judge that as good. And is that just someone's opinion that that's good? I think that's something that we would inevitably come to decide was good generally in most situations if we only apply reason to the problem of morality.
Scientists predict that eventually the whole universe and mankind with it will die out. So everything comes to nothing. That's why atheist Bertrand Russell says we must build our lives on the firm foundation of despair.
No thanks. I'd rather live a happy life.
You're not alone.
And I think Russell lived a pretty happy life. I mean, these are these cherry-picked quotes that seem to give you that opinion that the modern philosophers that did accept that the idea of an objective morality based on God is no longer tenable, that they never moved on. No, that was just a stage that most people went through, even the existentialists, accepting that the absurdity of our existence, moved on to construct meaning.
Every atheist has to choose between being happy or being consistent. You can tell the whole world you're an atheist, but you can't really live like one.
That is so silly. That is so silly. It just seems like propaganda that's aimed at sort of smearing. I suppose this is probably aimed at more the fence sitters, the people who are a little bit tempted to think that, oh, maybe there's no God, so that they can kind of smear atheism to make it sound like it's this state of utter despair. Really kind of low.
Okay, so you're a Christian. If your God did exist, how would that change anything?
If Christianity is true, then each one of us is here for a reason. And life does not end at the grave. And God, He's the absolute standard of goodness. He knows you, He loves you, and He intentionally created you. So your life ultimately does have objective meaning, value, and purpose. That means you can live a life that's both happy and consistent.
Well, that doesn't prove Christianity's true.
Agreed. I'm simply pointing out that for Christians, living a life that is both happy and consistent is possible.
I would say it's just as dubious for the Christian as it is for the atheist. Certainly there are atheists who get into nihilism and kind of never find their way out. But for most of us, we find some way philosophically to make sense of the world and make sense of our life. And it's hard work in many cases. And I think that's, in the Greek tradition, it's the hard work and the threat and the occasional despair is what ennobles that process of finding meaning in life. For me, from my perspective then, to look at Christianity where you have this received meaning and received purpose and received moral system, it doesn't look good from my point of view, just to try to keep things diplomatic. It really doesn't look good. I just think, wow, what a waste. What a waste of life to accept this external formula for your life with really no credible evidence to base the assumption that God exists is really unsupported, and then you go on to completely transform your life around that. That's unfathomable. Anyways, I think we're just about at the end of these credits now.
For atheists, it's not.
It's not possible. So the illusion that I have that I'm living some sort of I don't know. I'm sure I'm not completely consistent, but I try, and I do have an intellectually rich life, and I do enjoy my life. So it's just, you're just jaw dropping when you hear stuff like this, and you just wonder, do these people actually believe this? Do they think we're making things up when we say no, no, no? I'm doing okay, but I think I am more aware of some of the despair in life. Perhaps.
So, what are you going to choose?
Well, certainly you'd choose the one that is all nice, shiny, and presented in this wonderful, welcoming, and heartwarming and flattering way, wouldn't you? What was that? Oh, Christ. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I used to be a Christian, and I just couldn't live with the cognitive dissonance eventually. It just became too much. And when I finally deconverted, I was depressed for a while because you have to accept, okay, there's no afterlife. I'm not going to see dead loved ones again. I'm not going to live forever. That's kind of a bummer. But after 6 months later, the mystery of the universe really returned for me, and I began to enjoy life again. And I really feel more full and authentic on account of that. Thank you for listening to my commentary on this. Is there a meaning to life? From hosted on William Lane Craig's videos. Later.